In 1964, New York elicited the help of one Walt Disney to transform the city's largest dump into a beautiful 900-acre, $800 million theme park, only for it to be dismantled after just 2 years. It was a modern marvel of its time, now abandoned and crumbling decades later. This is the troubled history of the 1964 World's Fair and how it would change the landscape of theme parks forever. The Big Apple, the city of dreams. New York, in the 1950s and 60s, was undergoing a bit of a transformation, one might say. With a vibrant cultural shift, the civil rights movement in full swing, and large-scale urban development projects, New York was quickly becoming what many consider to be the capital of the world, a title the city and its officials would surely like to maintain. One way to do so would be to make an excuse to invite countries and companies from all around the globe to visit New York City. The answer: a World's Fair. World's Fairs at that point had been celebrated every few years since the mid-18th century. Host cities would create a large exposition designed to showcase the achievements of their nations and others who wished to participate. Many World's Fairs of the past had seen global debuts of countless technological advances, styles of performing arts, and inventions. Selection of where World's Fairs would take place was decided by the Bureau of International des Expositions, or BIE for short. As you could imagine, New York would be a prime candidate for an event of this scale. In the late 50s, local businessmen and elected officials devised a proposal for the World's Fair to make a return to New York in 1964, led in part by the New York Parks Commissioner Robert Moses. The plan was to use an 897-acre plot of land in Queens. As it turns out, the exact plot of land that would end up hosting the 1964 New York World's Fair still exists to this day. For the purpose of storytelling, I made my way to New York to explore this relic in theme park history. Guys, I just made it to the World's Fairgrounds, and I cannot tell you how hyped I am for this. Here it is. Here it is. Flushing Meadows Corona Park, which had previously been used for the 1939 New York World's Fair, was deemed as a prime location that had already seen many upgrades needed for hosting a World's Fair once again. See, in 1939, the city of New York spent $45 million to transform what was referred to as the Valley of Ashes in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby into a fully functioning park. Not to mention, being located in the heart of Queens, sandwiched between Manhattan and Long Island, it's as if the stars aligned. In 1959, after the city and US President Dwight D. Eisenhower granted approval for the plans to move forward, they hit a roadblock. BIE, the World's Fair Committee, denied the fair of a formal recognition as the United States had already had an official World's Fair planned for Seattle in 1962. Traditionally, countries would not be allowed to host consecutive World's Fairs, let alone what was seen as a competing World's Fair with how soon it was following Seattle. Robert Moses and his boys were not going to let that stop them. Construction began in late 1960, with over 350 companies signing on to the project. At a projected 70 million visitors, this was seen as a perfect advertising opportunity. 80 countries in total participated in the fair, with 66 constructing some sort of exhibit. It's around the same time that Moses came to the realization that his fair was lacking popular entertainment value. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure gas and electric companies would make wonderful presentations on the benefit of using their products, but that wouldn't leave a lasting memory with visitors. Moses saw the opening of Disneyland in California just 5 years prior, with the media coverage surrounding it and overwhelmingly positive response, as a template for how he imagined his World Fair would ideally play out. Who better to get on board with the project than Walt Disney himself? After much deliberation and pretty much an open checkbook, Walt agreed to join the endeavor by creating 4 attractions throughout the fair, with the promise that once the fair was over, he would have the option to move the attractions in New York over to Disneyland in California. As Walt and his Imagineers were busy planning their 4 attractions while still in California, local labor unions were hard at work building the temporary structures to house them and many others in New York. nearly all of which were unique in design. That certainly didn't help with the building costs, some exhibitors paying upwards to $14 million to build their pavilions. That equals about $150 million today. As opening day grew closer, construction was very much behind schedule. Presale tickets weren't selling as they had hoped, and the public became concerned over the promises made by Robert Moses. As president of the New York World's Fair project, Moses grew increasingly hostile towards journalists and publications that criticized his operation, which led to some interesting op-ed pieces written by Moses himself at the behest of the fair's president, and a refusal of any official press previews during the weeks leading up to opening day.
We don't pay too much attention to the critics. We never build anything. No critic ever built anything.
Nevertheless, Moses and his World's Fair opened right on schedule. Besides 15 pavilions not being completed in time, it was fully ready. Yup, all done.
Everyone is coming to the New York World's Fair. They're coming from the four corners of the earth and from Five Corners, Idaho. They come down from New Athens, Maine, and from Athens, Greece, and from Tokyo, and Kokomo, and Rome, down from Frisco, and down from Troy, from Hamburg, from Nineveh, from Aurora, Illinois.
Right now, I am standing at the main entrance of the 1964 World's Fair, which surprisingly, over the past 60 plus years, has remained virtually untouched. A strange feeling to say the least. No turnstiles, no ticket booths, it's just a regular park nowadays. If you ignore the commemorative plaques and signage, you'd never know how important this once was. On April 22nd of 1964, a grand opening celebration was broadcast around the world, featuring dedication speeches from then U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, Nelson Rockefeller, and Robert Moses. During the opening ceremonies, hundreds of civil rights activists organized a protest, blocking roadways leading to the fair, 30 of which were arrested for disrupting the peace and trespassing. The 1964 World's Fair motto, "Peace through Understanding," was seen by many as tone-deaf amidst the social racial inequalities the civil rights movement was fighting for in the mid-60s. That, along with Moses's purposeful planning, or lack thereof, of proper affordable transportation to the fair, was enough reason for protest. Not a lot of people liked Robert Moses, from his past urban planning strategies to demolish low-income tenement housing to make way for bridges and roadways, to intentionally rejecting a proposal to expand New York mass transit lines to the fair, making it very difficult for lower-class New Yorkers without cars to attend, many of which of non-white background. The civil rights protest was not the only blip on the World's Fair's opening day radar. Less than half of the fair's projected attendees were present for the opening ceremonies. With only 90,000 making their way to Flushing Meadows Park on April 22nd, the future of the fair was not looking bright. So aside from opening day, with its protests and low crowds, what was it really like to experience the 1964 New York World's Fair? First, I'll have to explain exactly how this place was laid out. Once guests passed through the main gate, they would then enter the first of 5 separate lands. The park would be divided into sections dedicated to industry, international culture, federal and state pavilions, transportation, and amusement. As you could probably tell, it would have been nearly impossible to experience everything this fair had to offer, especially if crowds were as expected. And according to guests who experienced the fair following opening day, weekends especially were very busy.
Okay, hi, my name is Gary. I attended the 1964-65 New York World's Fair about 3 or 4 times.
And how old are you in this photo?
18.
18. And how old are you now?
79.
You don't look any different at all.
Well, except for the hair, you know.
My name is Peggy, and I attended, when I was 10 years old, the New York World's Fair. I think it was the first time I experienced crowds. Hadn't even traveled into New York City that much. So going there was a big event. I had never gone to any big fair and didn't know quite what to do first.
The main entrance led right into the industrial section, the largest of the 5 areas, and the one with by far the most corporate-sponsored pavilions. Right now we are in the former industrial area, which was home to so many great and
not so great attractions.
Everywhere you turn were corporate sponsorships. Coca-Cola, Pan Am, Scott Paper, Bell Systems, Allstate Insurance, IBM, Macy's, the Mormon Church, Kodak, Simmons, Schaefer Brewing, and Travelers Insurance, just to name a few. Some of which provided entertainment value, others served more as blatant ads.
Like Dow Chemical had a showing you how to mix this with that. I'll tell you this, that was very boring, and I hated it. I couldn't wait to get out of that area.
At the center of the realm of industry was the Fountain of the Planets, a lagoon home to a nighttime fountain/fireworks show. It was a great way to end a long day at the World's Fair and, honestly, a pretty impressive show for 1960s standards.
Right now, it doesn't seem like the Fountain of Planets is working. Granted, it probably hasn't been running for decades by this point.
A beautiful centerpiece to what was otherwise a land of billboards. Not to say there wasn't at least a few great experiences.
If we were to turn back the clock to 1964 and look just to the right of the Fountain of the Planets, we would find ourselves standing in front of the General Electric Pavilion. That is right, the Carousel of Progress.
This is the Carousel Theater of Progress. In Act 1, the audience meets an audio animatronic family. The time is just before the turn of the century. Father, the host, tells the joys of living in the pre-electric era.
What has since become a staple of Tomorrowland at the Magic Kingdom once got its start here at the World's Fair. Its exterior look and building it's housed in has changed a few times since 1964. Its spirit, for the most part, has stayed the same.
Guys, I cannot get over the fact that, like, Walt Disney walked here. I know it's different. I live in Orlando. I've been to Disneyland plenty of times. But this is just weird because this is just the middle of a park. I don't know. Guys, this is the Carousel of Progress. This is where it was born!
What makes the fact that Carousel of Progress was part of this World's Fair so important, it's that it was part of a huge leap in technology. Previous to the carousel's creation, the most advanced audio animatronics could be found in Disneyland's Enchanted Tiki Room. It's one thing to create an automated bird puppet that moves its head and opens its beak, but never before had anyone seen such lifelike humanoid animatronics, let alone an entire rotating theater full of them. A ride of this scale and all of its robot inhabitants cost a fortune to create. $15 million to be exact, a steep price that General Electric was willing to pay the Walt Disney Company to have their name attached to one of the top attractions at the fair. The Carousel of Progress was truly a textbook definition of a World's Fair attraction, combining history, education, and entertainment into one show. It was a first-hand look at the advent of electricity in the home, wowing guests with robot actors, all while sneaking in plugs for the sponsor.
Being a Disney fan, I wanted to go to the World's Fair to see Carousel of Progress, which is still one of my favorite rides.
But I was most excited to go see It's a Small World, and that's the first place it was shown. That was the big ride, I remember. And of course, as a kid, that was fantastic. I was so excited to see all the animation around me.
It's a Small World, another Walt Disney original attraction that got its start here at the World's Fair, was sponsored by Pepsi Cola. What does a soda have to do with the celebration of cultures around the world? I've got no idea. But it was Walt Disney's idea, and Pepsi was down for it.
Each side, it's a small world. All this animation going on, and I never experienced that before. And we had never been to Disneyland. I had to beg my dad every Sunday to watch The Wonderful World of Disney on television. Tinkerbell would fly over the castle, so to see anything that was Disney related, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Disneyland.
The exterior of It's a Small World at the World's Fair again would look different from the version that would eventually end up at Disneyland. It featured a 120-foot sculpture designed by Imagineering legend Rolly Crump, titled Tower of the Four Winds, and was often where you would be able to find Disney characters roaming the fairgrounds. While inside the attraction, you'd find over 300 audio animatronic dolls in their traditional costumes from their home countries. A ride in the industrial area of the park that likely would have been better fitting with the international pavilions.
The teachers will bring back to their classes snapshots of the Far East and stories of many lands.
In the international section of the World's Fair, you'd find representation from over 60 countries, including modern exhibits from India, Venezuela, Korea, and Mexico, as well as recreations of old European towns. giving visitors flavors from all over the globe, many of which had yet to make their debut in most rural areas of the United States.
Well, they had a lot of different foods too that I'd never experienced before. And we thought it was so exotic with the Chinese food that they had there, chop suey and egg rolls. That was the biggest thing that impressed me, to see all this different ethnic food, and they were dressed in the garb of that country.
It seems kind of silly in today's day and age that Chinese food at one point was considered exotic cuisine, but it really does show that in the 60s and even up to the 80s, international foods, at least an Americanized version of it, had yet to hit the mainstream. Some prominent countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Italy were not present, due to them being members of the BIE, who, remember, had not approved the '64 World's Fair. Not like it would have been hard to find Italian food anywhere else in New York City. Another major draw to the fair outside of the Disney attractions was the Vatican Pavilion. Wanting to provide something special for the American crowds, many of whom had never been to Vatican City, Michelangelo's Pietà sculpture was shipped to Queens for display at the fair.
My family had their sights on going to the Pietà to see that, and that was like, we had to do that first. So we went through that, and it was actually on a conveyor belt, so that you had to be very quiet, very pious, and it went past the Pietà very, very slowly, so everyone had the equal amount of time to see it.
The Vatican Pavilion, second to General Motors, stood as one of the most visited attractions, reaching over 10 million guests by the end of its run. Bear in mind, in the 1960s, about 25% of the United States population identified as Catholic, and many families from the tri-state area jumped at the chance to see this rare piece of history.
Today, the Vatican Pavilion is in no way, shape, or form here at Flushing Meadows Park. In its place is a skate park. I wonder if any of these skaters know that there used to be... I won't bother them. At the center of the World's Fair was, or should I say, is, the Unisphere.
Unisphere, the largest representation of our globe ever attempted. Unisphere, the largest stainless steel structure yet built. Stainless steel. Why? Because it is to become a permanent landmark, Unisphere must be virtually maintenance-free, yet remain enduringly beautiful.
One thing that Robert Moses took from Disneyland's concept was a park centerpiece. But rather than shoehorn in a castle straight out of a fairy tale, they created the Unisphere to represent global interdependence. This stainless steel representation of Earth was one of the first structures to be assembled at the fairgrounds. Construction of the Unisphere took just 110 days between March and August of 1963. It acted as not only the centerpiece of the fair, but as its promotional symbol, appearing on most advertisements and logos for the fair. It was also the perfect backdrop for many of the fair's TV specials and documentaries.
To this day, the Unisphere stands as the centerpiece of Flushing Meadows Park and is really the only hint that this land used to be used for something greater.
While the Unisphere is certainly a lasting icon of the fair, there are a few buildings left that are hanging on by a thread. Just beyond the Unisphere, in the distance, you'll catch a glimpse of a relic of the World's Fair and film history. The New York State Pavilion was one of 16 states or regions represented in the federal and state area of the 1964 World's Fair. It was made up of 3 parts. The observation tower, the tallest of which that stood at a height of 226 feet. Guests could climb the stairs or take an exterior elevator to the top of the tower to catch what many describe as some of the best views of the New York skyline. The second, Theaterama, a theater showing short films during the fair. And third, the Tent of Tomorrow, a multi-purpose venue hosting concerts, fashion shows, and sometimes small museum exhibits. Its roof was first made up of multicolored plastic panels attached to a wire suspension system, and now, for obvious weather reasons, is no longer intact. Here in the year 2025, the whole area is extremely overgrown, dilapidated, and sitting behind a barbed wire fence with restricted area signs.
Even in the state that it is today, I'm still really glad that this structure is here. It's not very often you get to find historical landmarks decaying in real time.
It seems over the past few decades there has been an effort to restore the New York State Pavilion. They did have scaffolding set up around the observation towers, but zero work was being done, at least during my visit.
You might recognize this iconic architectural structure from a particular blockbuster hit of 1997.
Men in black, protecting the Earth from the scum of the universe.
The sci-fi action film Men in Black tells the story of two members of the MIB in charge of monitoring and policing extraterrestrials in the tri-state area. The climax of the film takes place at the New York State Pavilion, where the observation deck transforms into an escape pod for the main villain as it detaches from the tower and flies away, only to be shot down by the duo mere seconds later. A fun, unique storytelling tool that makes reference to the Old World's Fair, or why the New York State Pavilion might have been built in the first place. Before you ask, no, they did not harm the Unisphere or the New York Pavilion during the filming of this movie.
Maybe it was hometown pride that kept the pavilion intact, or maybe, just like in Men in Black, those were spaceships all along. Sorry about that, spoiler alert. Spoiler!
On the far right side of the federal and state area of the World's Fairgrounds currently sits Arthur Ashe Stadium, a 23,000-seat tennis arena that hosts the US Open tournament every year. Decades before its construction in 1997, this was the location of yet another Walt Disney World's Fair collaboration. The Illinois Pavilion would host a one-man show starring a historic depiction of former President Abraham Lincoln. An unremarkable pitch for live theater standards made all the more interesting when Walt proposed it be a Lincoln robot. This marked one of the first times ever that a historic figure would be brought back to life in animatronic form. The question of should this even be done was brought to the table, while Walt and his Imagineers were more focused on if it could be done. The Lincoln animatronic was more than troublesome, to say the least, made even more complex when a key moment in the show would involve him getting up from his chair. Needless to say, the crowds were amazed by great moments with Mr. Lincoln, so much so that it would make its way to Disneyland following the 1965 season of the fair, along with It's a Small World and the Carousel of Progress.
When I went to the World's Fair, I really wanted to see the Lincoln and the other attractions, but when I found out after the World's Fair was over and they were going to eventually come to Disneyland, I was so excited because I knew in several years I was going to be moving to California from New Jersey, and this way I could see him all the time, not have to wait 2 hours in line to see Lincoln or the Carousel of Progress.
Disney's influence on the fair was not only in the projects that he was directly involved in, but through the transportation inside the fair as well. Guests could hop on a Skyway bucket and take it across the fairgrounds, or ride a suspended monorail around the amusement area. It was very clear that some attractions were pulled from the Disneyland lineup. Others in the amusement area were definitely closer to county fair quality, including your standard lineup of carnival flat rides, miniature trains, a log flume, and a circus. Moving back over the Long Island Expressway in Grand Central over to the transportation area, where I discovered this tall, strange-looking building with Terrace on the Park written on the side. I would soon find out that this was the former Port Authority building, during the World's Fair, the roof of which would be used as a helipad for high-profile guests attending, including a few presidents. It remains here in Flushing Meadows some 60-plus years later, as mainly a wedding venue. Also still there was the Hall of Science. With a very unique design for the mid-60s, the Hall of Science would give World's Fair guests an educational look at space travel, including rockets once used to launch astronauts into orbit.
Right across from the Hall of Science, in the place of this parking lot, was our final piece of Disney history, Ford's Magic Skyway.
Commissioned by the Ford Motor Company and created by Walt Disney Imagineering, Ford's Magic Skyway placed guests inside a new Ford model car on an Omnimover track, took them into the prehistoric era through multiple dioramas and into the future. While the Carousel of Progress and Great Moments with Lincoln boasted lifelike human animatronics, it was these prehistoric animatronics that drew guests to the Magic Skyway. Unlike the other Disney attractions at the fair, sadly, Ford's Magic Skyway would not make its way to Disneyland in one piece. The dinosaur diorama did make its way to the park, and was added to the Disneyland Railroad between Tomorrowland and the Main Street Station, where it remains to this day. The 1964 World's Fair, by all means, should have been a success. Attendance throughout the first season would have needed to hit an average of 220,000 visitors per day in order to cover the operational costs. But even on weekends, it struggled to pull in more than 200,000. Between May and October of 1964, a reported 33 million people visited the World's Fair, a very impressive number that still fell short of their projected goal of 40 million. Even then, they'd only be breaking even. This meant that the second season of the fair would need to make up the difference. With a refreshed marketing campaign and increased ticket prices from $2 to $2.50, the fair reopened on April 21st of 1965 to an attendance of 150,000. The second season of the World's Fair proved to be even more disappointing than the first. 18 million people visited in 1965. For those at home doing the math, that's a total of 51 million visitors. Financially, the World's Fair was a disaster. The critics weren't all too pleased either.
See, many World's Fairs of the mid-20th century saw renowned forward thinkers debuting their brand new inventions. Critics of the time felt the 64 fair lacked technological advances, felt kitschy, and was overburdened by corporate sponsorships.
The fair needed these sponsorships to afford the big-ticket attractions. The fair also needed the big-ticket attractions for the crowds to show up. It was a big gamble that didn't pay off. While Robert Moses's legacy would forever be tarnished by the financial burden the World's Fair would be to the city of New York, Walt Disney's legacy of being one of the greatest storytellers of all time was being solidified.
It amazes me how Walt Disney and his Imagineers participating in a few corporate-sponsored exhibitions could lead to so many advances in the themed entertainment space.
The 1964-65 World's Fair would be seen as such a pivotal moment in the Walt Disney Company's history that 50 years later it was partially recreated for their 2015 film, Tomorrowland. In the opening scene of the film, our main character, Frank Walker, attends the New York World's Fair in 1964, rides It's a Small World, and attempts to sell his prototype jetpack. I would tell you to go watch it, so this makes more sense, but that movie is all over the place. Even though it's considered not so great with a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think it's worth the watch for the first 5 minutes alone. It's a beautiful, extremely accurate depiction of the World's Fair, even down to these Greyhound glide ride trolleys and this Easter egg of the General Motors Pavilion while our main character is in line for It's a Small World. A building that in real life was nowhere near It's a Small World, probably about half a mile away, but I'll let it slide.
Following the 1965 season, it was decided that the city would remove about 90% of the World's Fair buildings. As you could probably tell, there's not a whole lot left. Although the World's Fair was leaving Queens, New York, the spirit of the event would live on in both the rides that made their way to Disneyland and 17 years later at Disney World's Epcot Park.
One of Walt Disney's big takeaways from the 64-65 World's Fair was how to better work with corporate sponsors. Not that Disneyland wasn't already teeming with sponsorships, but he would need these relationships to help fund his next big project, Epcot. Not the Epcot we know today, but this one was the brainchild of Walt himself. He wanted to create a city of tomorrow. Disney World in Florida to Walt was in part a means to get his city built. When Walt Disney passed away in December of 1966, his plans for a future city died with him. Epcot, as we all know, would eventually become a theme park, a sort of permanent World's Fair, or at least that's what it used to be.
Going to Epcot seems like a permanent World's Fair, which it's supposed to be. It is so beautiful. I think it's a smaller version of the World's Fair because the one in New York was so massive. I mean, it seems like hundreds of acres. Thinking about Epcot now, I really miss the old Epcot. When I went the first year in 1983, a year after it opened, I just loved the Future World part of the buildings with all the auto animatronics, the stories it told, and I really miss that.
If you could go back in time and visit the 1965 World's Fair, would you? Let me know in the comments down below. A simple yes or no in all caps will do, and it's really the only way I know you made it this far in the video. This trip to the old 1964 World's Fair would not have been made possible without the amazing people over at Roosevelt's for having me out at New York Comic Con this year. Rather than sit at home and tell the same old story, I always try to get my boots on the ground and see these historical spots with my own eyes. I've been blessed with great opportunities to do what I love and rock some awesome threads in the process. Wow, what a transition. For 15% off your first order from Roosevelt's, follow the link in the description of this video. You won't regret it.
If you enjoyed this video on the World's Fair and want to learn more about New York theme park history, please go check out my video on the rise and fall of Coney Island, or
one of my all-time favorites over here. As always, I am Ryan. This has been For the Love of Theme Parks, and I will see you all real soon. Bye.